There was a time when the land here stretched out like an endless horizon, where the weight of the earth seemed to press down on every inch, sinking into the bones of the people who toiled beneath it. The wind would sweep across the cotton fields in waves, stirring the heavy silence that hung in the air like an unspoken rule. This was a place where history was not taught but lived, where every inch of ground bore the mark of labor, of sweat, of a world that demanded more than it ever gave. Here, the lives of those who worked were measured by their endurance, by their ability to withstand the heat of the sun and the weight of the expectations thrust upon them. They were as much a part of the land as the cotton that grew in the fields, their existence bound to the rhythm of the seasons, their purpose defined by the needs of the plantation. And yet, there was something in the air, something that whispered of change, though few were brave enough to acknowledge it. The mistress stood at the heart of it all, the center of power, though she hardly seemed to notice. Her world was one of control, a delicate balance between maintaining the order she demanded and the quiet unrest that simmered just below the surface. She had learned early on that to be in control meant never showing weakness, never allowing a crack in the armor she had built around herself. The plantation was her kingdom, and she was the queen who ruled with an iron fist, her eyes always sharp, always watchful. She moved through her home with purpose, her every step calculated, her every glance sharp, as if the very air was something she could command. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was with the kind of authority that left no room for dissent. And then there was Evelyn. Evelyn had been brought here just days before, a new face among the others, though she stood apart from them all. There was something about her that made her different, a quality that caught the mistress's eye from the moment she first saw her. It wasn't her looks, though her face was striking, framed by dark curls that cascaded down her back in defiance of the humidity. No, it was the way she carried herself. Her body was not bowed by the weight of the work, not yet shaped by the brutal rhythms of the plantation. Her eyes, those dark, steady eyes, looked ahead with a kind of quiet resolve that made the mistress uneasy. She could see it, the faintest flicker of something that didn't belong in this world. Something that, if allowed to grow, could unravel the delicate fabric of control she had so carefully woven. At first, Evelyn worked like the others, her hands moving through the motions of labor with the same effortful grace, the same forced compliance. But there was something in the way she moved, something in the way she resisted the weariness that clung to the others, that made the mistress take note. It wasn't defiance exactly, not yet. But it was close. Too close for comfort. And in a place like this, there was no room for anything that might disrupt the order of things. It was a quiet rebellion, one that would go unnoticed by most, but not by her. Evelyn had already made her decision without realizing it. She had chosen to survive, to endure. And that made her dangerous. The days stretched on, and the mistress observed Evelyn closely. She could feel the tension between them, subtle, like a thread pulled just tight enough to snap. And one afternoon, when the sun hung heavy in the sky, when the air was thick with the scent of earth and sweat, the mistress made her move. Evelyn was called to the house, and there, in the shadow of the grand plantation walls, she was handed her fate. The mistress, cool and composed, told her what would happen next. She would be sent to the two men who worked beyond the fields, the ones who had seen the darker side of power and understood what it meant to break someone. They were not like the other overseers. No, these men were feared in ways that ran deeper than the whip's bite. They took pleasure in the things others couldn't bear to think of, and it was that pleasure, that thirst for control, that had brought them here. And so, Evelyn's fate was sealed with the flick of a hand, the quiet authority of the mistress deciding what would happen next. Evelyn, standing tall as always, heard the words but did not flinch. She did not beg. She did not cry. There was only silence between them, a silence filled with the weight of something unspoken, something that neither could name but both knew was there. And as she turned to leave, as she walked away from the house and into the unknown, Evelyn's mind began to stir. She had known the cruelty of the world she inhabited, but what lay ahead was something different, something she wasn't ready to face. Yet in that moment, Evelyn understood something that most of the others didn't. Survival was not a choice, but a curse. And it was the cost of survival that would cost her everything. For days, Evelyn was taken from the house, escorted away from the small semblance of safety she had known. She walked through the dust-choked roads, her body weighed down by the uncertainty of what was to come. The world was silent around her, save for the creak of the wagon wheels that carried her forward, her thoughts racing in the quiet storm that churned in her mind. What would they do to her? What would happen to her now that she was no longer part of the mistress's plan? The answers, she feared, were as endless as the road itself. But even in the face of that fear, Evelyn did not break. She had been broken once before, but that had been a long time ago. And the girl who had endured all of that was no more. This was someone else, someone who would not bend. Not again. Not ever. The men who awaited her knew nothing of the fire that burned within her. They saw only a girl, a new body to use and discard. And they would soon learn, as the mistress already knew, that Evelyn would not be so easily broken. But what neither of them could anticipate was how that courage, that fire, would set in motion a series of events none of them could control. And so the story began, not with a whimper, not with a cry, but with a single, determined step. Evelyn's story was about to unfold in a way no one could predict. And as she approached the darkness ahead, there was no turning back. The decision had been made. The road was set. And the price of survival would soon be revealed. Evelyn stood in the field, her hands raw from the relentless work, her body aching with exhaustion. The sun had begun to sink behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the earth, but still, she continued. She had done her task, just like the others, but where most bent under the weight of it, she stood tall, her posture straight, her eyes fixed ahead. There was no sign of surrender in her. No trace of defeat. And it was that defiance, that unwavering refusal to be cowed by the demands of the mistress, that caught the mistress's eye for the first time. It was not a dramatic moment, not a loud protest or an overt act of rebellion. It was quieter than that. It was in the way Evelyn carried herself when she was ordered to carry an impossible load, how she didn't flinch when a punishment was handed down. The others cringed, lowered their eyes, but Evelyn stood her ground. That small act of resistance, so simple and yet so defiant, did not go unnoticed. The mistress had seen many things in her time, many acts of resistance, some open, some hidden beneath the surface. But there was something in Evelyn's resistance that felt different. It was not born of anger or rebellion, it was born of something quieter, more dangerous. It was born of a deep-rooted survival, a resilience that couldn't be broken. And that, more than anything, threatened the mistress's world. Her power was built on control, on bending others to her will, and Evelyn refused to bend. That evening, as the workers gathered in the stables for rest, the mistress made her decision. She stood at the threshold of the house, watching the silhouettes of the enslaved, their bodies hunched in exhaustion, as they trudged back to their quarters. But there was no rest for Evelyn, not tonight. The mistress had already called for her. When Evelyn arrived, the mistress was waiting, seated in her usual place. The room was dim, lit only by a few candles, their flickering light casting shadows on the walls. There was no warmth here, no comfort. Only the cold precision of power. The mistress looked Evelyn up and down, her gaze lingering for a moment longer than it should have. "You've been nothing but trouble since you arrived," the mistress said, her voice low, controlled. "You think you can stand above the rest of them, don't you? You think your resilience is something to be proud of." Evelyn said nothing, her chest rising and falling with every breath. She knew better than to speak without being spoken to, but her silence was her own rebellion. The mistress's eyes narrowed. "You think you're special. But let me remind you, this place is not for the strong. This place is for those who know how to serve. And serve you will, whether you want to or not." The mistress's words hung in the air, thick with menace. Evelyn could feel the shift in the room, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had known something was coming. She had known that her defiance wouldn't be tolerated forever. But still, a part of her had hoped it wouldn't come to this. The mistress stood, her tall frame casting a shadow over Evelyn. She walked slowly, deliberately, to the window, looking out over the fields where the work continued, a never-ending cycle of toil. "I could break you," she said quietly, almost to herself, "but I have no interest in breaking you. Not yet. But you need to learn. You need to learn that no one is above the rest. Not even you." The mistress turned, her face cold as stone. "You will go to them," she said. "The two men. You'll learn what it means to be truly broken." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The two men. Masters of a different kind. The names were whispered in hushed tones among the workers, Master Joseph and Master Thomas. They were feared, even more than the overseers. Joseph was old, his face weathered and worn by years of cruelty. He was known for his unforgiving punishment, his brutal methods that left people broken, barely able to stand. But it was Thomas, the younger one, who made people tremble the most. He was unpredictable, sadistic, and reveled in fear. There was no logic to his cruelty, no pattern, only the pleasure of causing pain. The mistress's words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the fear creeping in, the suffocating weight of the uncertainty. The fear of what was to come. But alongside it was something else, something darker, deeper. The knowledge that this was the moment. The moment where her courage would either break or become something she couldn't control. "I won't go," Evelyn said, her voice shaking despite herself. The mistress stepped closer, her cold eyes locking onto Evelyn's. "You will. You have no choice. Pack your things. You leave at dawn." Evelyn swallowed hard. She had no choice. She knew that. But there was something else in her chest, something that screamed at her to run, to fight, to find a way out. She could feel the weight of the mistress's gaze, the unspoken command that hovered in the room like a trap. But Evelyn did not break. Not this time. With a steady breath, she turned and walked toward the small room she shared with the others. The mistress watched her go, her gaze calculating, knowing full well that this would be a turning point. Evelyn would learn what it truly meant to survive, or she would be destroyed. Evelyn's hands shook as she packed the few belongings she had. Her meager possessions, the remnants of a life that had already been stolen from her. She didn't look back as she stepped into the night, the weight of the journey ahead heavy on her shoulders. She could feel the eyes of the other workers on her, their silent pity and fear. But Evelyn had never been one to ask for pity. And she wasn't about to start now. At the edge of the plantation, the cart was waiting. The driver, a silent man with hollow eyes, didn't speak as he gestured for Evelyn to climb aboard. As she did, she glanced back once, at the house that had become both a prison and a place of unimaginable power. And then, she was gone. But the mistress was not done with her yet. Not by a long shot. The journey would take her to the edge of everything she had known, into the dark and twisted world of two men who would test her courage, her limits, and perhaps her very soul. The mistress knew it was only a matter of time before Evelyn would break. Everyone did. Everyone who came into contact with the two monstrous men did. But what she didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that Evelyn had already made a choice. She had already decided that no matter what, she would survive. She would survive, and she would do it on her own terms. And so, as the cart rumbled down the road, Evelyn's future began to take shape. A future that would not be defined by the mistress or the two men waiting for her. A future that would be hers to command. But first, she would have to face them. The men who had seen it all, who had broken countless others before her. The real test was only just beginning. The wagon jolted with each uneven bump in the road as Evelyn sat at the edge, her back stiff and her fingers clenched around the worn fabric of her dress. The chill of the night air seeped into her skin, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. No, it was the weight of what lay ahead. The road stretched out before her, a dark path winding through the wilderness, the trees crowding in on either side like silent witnesses to her fate. The low hum of the wheels on gravel and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves were the only sounds that filled the air, each step further separating her from the life she had known, each moment carrying her closer to the unknown. Her thoughts were a tangle, shifting between fear, anger, and something more unsettling, a strange, cold resolve that seemed to grow stronger the further they traveled. She had thought that when she was told of her fate, she would crumble, but now, in the stillness of the night, she found herself steeling herself for what lay ahead. There was no going back. Whatever awaited her on this journey would change her, and though the fear gnawed at her gut, there was also something that sparked in her, a sliver of defiance, like a flame in the darkness. She would not break. The trees thinned out, and soon, the dense forest gave way to an open field, the land stretching out in front of her, endless and barren. The wagon creaked to a halt in front of a large, weathered barn. It looked out of place here, isolated and decaying, the very air around it thick with a sense of foreboding. The barn's timbers groaned under the weight of the years, and the stench of sweat and animal filth hung heavy in the air. The building itself seemed to pulse with an energy all its own, as if it were alive, watching, waiting for what would happen next. Evelyn didn't move as the driver dismounted and stepped to the back of the wagon, his face hidden in the shadows of his hood. He opened the door and, without a word, gestured for her to get down. She hesitated for only a moment before swinging her legs over the side and stepping down into the dirt, the earth beneath her feet firm but unyielding. There was no comfort here, no shelter, only the oppressive weight of the barn before her. She could hear them now. The low murmur of voices coming from within, deep, guttural, filled with an unsettling authority. The barn loomed before her, like a prison made of wood and shadows. And then, they appeared. The first man, the older one, emerged from the gloom. His frame was thick, his posture rigid with the kind of strength that came from years of cruelty. His face was weathered, craggy, like the earth itself had worn him down. His eyes were hard, narrowed into a permanent glare, and his mouth twisted into a sneer as he assessed Evelyn from head to toe. His presence was suffocating, a force that seemed to fill the space around him. "You must be her," the older man said, his voice low and rough, as though speaking was a strain. He didn't wait for a response, his gaze already moving to the other figure that had emerged from the shadows. The second man was younger, but there was a malevolence in him that immediately set him apart from the older one. He smiled, a cold, predatory grin that seemed to grow wider with every passing second. His eyes glinted in the dim light, filled with a strange amusement as he watched Evelyn. "Well, well," the younger man purred, his voice smooth and mocking. "A little fire in you, I see. How delightful. I do enjoy a challenge." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stood before them. The older man exuded a brutal, unyielding force, while the younger one seemed to enjoy the power he held over her, as though her fear was something to be savored. She took a step back, her body moving instinctively, but she quickly caught herself. She would not show them the fear they so clearly wanted to see. She would not give them the satisfaction. The older man grunted and motioned toward the barn with a jerk of his head. "Inside," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "We don't have all night." Evelyn's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to walk forward, her legs stiff as she crossed the threshold into the barn. The air inside was thick, humid with the stench of sweat, blood, and animals. The space was dim, filled with shadows that stretched long across the walls. The floor was covered in muck, the remnants of years of labor and torment. The barn was a cage, a place designed to break anyone who entered, to strip them of their will and their humanity. As she walked deeper into the barn, the older man and the younger man followed, their presence like a weight pressing down on her. The older man led the way, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. The younger one trailed behind, his gaze never leaving Evelyn, his eyes following her with a hunger that sent a chill down her spine. The barn was empty except for a few scattered tools. Chains, whips, and other implements of torment that had been discarded on the floor. The silence that filled the space was oppressive, thick with the tension of what was about to unfold. The older man motioned for Evelyn to kneel, his voice cold and devoid of any warmth. "This is where you will learn your place. We don't tolerate weakness here. We don't tolerate resistance. You will do as you are told, or you will suffer." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor before her. She would not give them the satisfaction of hearing her voice. She would not show them the terror that gnawed at her insides. But she could feel it, their eyes on her, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. The younger man stepped forward, his gaze locking onto hers, his smile widening. "I think you'll be a fun one to break," he said softly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. "But don't worry. I'll make sure it's memorable." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the fire inside her, the defiance that refused to be extinguished. They may have control here, but they would never have her soul. Not if she could help it. The older man turned away, his attention elsewhere, leaving Evelyn alone with the younger one. And as he moved, the tension in the room shifted, thickened, and Evelyn knew that whatever came next would test her in ways she had never imagined. But she would not break. She would not let them win. In the shadow of that barn, the next chapter of her journey was unfolding. One way or another, this world, this twisted, oppressive world, was about to find out just how far Evelyn was willing to go to survive. The first night in the barn was the beginning of something that would shape Evelyn forever. The cold, damp floor of the barn pressed against her knees as she knelt in the dim light, her skin bruised from the force of the older master's hand. He had struck her once, then twice, to remind her of his authority. Each blow was a test, one that she had expected, but never quite prepared for. His hands were rough, calloused from years of cruelty, his strength unmatched. His eyes, like stones, showed no emotion as he forced her into submission. But Evelyn did not break. The pain was sharp, like fire, but it didn't reach her soul. Her body might have been bruised, but her spirit remained untarnished. She refused to cry, refused to show the weakness they so desperately wanted to see. Every time he looked down at her, expecting to see defeat, she met his gaze with defiance. It was a silent rebellion, one that cut deeper than any blow he could land. She would not be his. Not in this moment. "On your feet," the older master growled, his voice low and guttural, as he pulled her up by the arm. Evelyn's legs were weak, but she stood. The pain throbbed through her body, but she didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She forced herself to stand tall, her head held high, even as the room swirled with the dizziness of the pain. The older master shoved her toward the center of the barn, where the younger one waited, leaning casually against the wall with a smile that chilled her to the bone. "Get to work," the older master barked. His words were final, devoid of compassion, but Evelyn did not respond. She didn't need to. The younger master's eyes followed her every movement with an unsettling intensity, his smile widening as he stepped forward. He spoke slowly, as though savoring each word. "You think you're strong, don't you? That you can endure the pain. That you can withstand it all." His voice was soft, deceptively calm. "But pain, my dear, is just the beginning. What happens when we take away everything you know? Your mind? Your sense of self?" Evelyn clenched her fists at her sides, but she didn't say a word. The younger master's cruel pleasure was evident in his every move as he circled her, like a predator closing in on its prey. He continued, "You think you're brave? But you're nothing more than a scared little girl trying to fight back against something you don't understand. We'll make you understand, though. We'll make you see. His words were a poison, but Evelyn refused to let them sink in. She had seen men like him before, and she knew that beneath the facade of control, they were just as broken as the ones they tried to break. His cruelty was a shield that kept him from confronting the emptiness within. A sharp crack echoed in the barn as the older master's hand struck her again, sending a shock of pain through her jaw. This time, she felt her body stumble, her legs trembling beneath her. For a moment, she almost gave in. But then, she steadied herself, rising back up with a single thought in her mind: I will not bend. The younger master smirked, his eyes gleaming with amusement. You see, it's not just about breaking your body. It's about breaking your mind, your heart. You'll learn soon enough that resistance isn't just futile, it's painful. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes piercing through the haze of fear and pain, as if daring him to break her. In the midst of this torment, something small but significant happened. As she was pushed to the floor once again, a fleeting moment of vulnerability slipped through, like a crack in her armor. For just an instant, as the younger master's laughter filled the air, she caught the faintest glance from across the barn. One of the other slaves, a young man who had been working in the yard earlier that day, locked eyes with her through the barred windows. He was just outside, standing with the others, his body stiff and tense as he looked at her, his gaze filled with silent understanding. The briefest moment, a look, a flicker of recognition. Evelyn's chest tightened. It was as if, in that fleeting second, the weight of the world lifted just enough for her to see the possibility of something beyond the torture, something beyond the cruelty. It was as if that look had passed between them as a silent promise, an unspoken agreement that she was not alone in this. There was someone who saw her, who understood, who perhaps would be willing to help. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was enough. The young man's eyes lingered for a moment before he quickly looked away, his posture stiffening as if he had betrayed a secret. But in that brief exchange, Evelyn found a spark, one of hope, one of connection. She didn't know how or when, but the feeling rose in her like a slow, steady flame. She wasn't entirely alone in this place. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out. The older master, who had been watching the brief exchange with a mixture of suspicion and disinterest, stepped forward and grabbed her roughly by the arm. "Focus, girl," he growled. "You're not here for sympathy. You're here to be taught a lesson. And you're going to learn it the hard way." Evelyn said nothing. But inside, the fire that had been kindled by that moment of connection burned brighter. She would endure. She would stand tall. And when the time came, she would fight back. She would find a way to survive, to escape this place, no matter the cost. The next few days were filled with the same brutality, the same unrelenting cruelty. The older master's method was simple and direct: force, violence, domination. He was a man who demanded respect through sheer intimidation, breaking down anything in his path. But the younger master, the sadistic one, was more insidious. He played with her mind, spinning cruel games of manipulation and deceit, twisting her thoughts, forcing her to doubt herself, to question her every move. He tested her, pushing her to her breaking point, and though Evelyn trembled at times, she never allowed him to see it. The tension built with each passing day, and Evelyn felt herself walking the fine line between surrender and resistance. It was a battle fought not with her body, but with her mind and her will. And through it all, the spark of that connection, the brief look from the young man, remained, a silent thread of hope threading through the darkness. She wasn't broken yet. And she wasn't going to be. Evelyn had endured every test they set before her, the physical torment, the mental games, but something inside her had begun to shift. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to understand the rules of the game, the twisted psychology behind their cruelty. Each blow, Each taunt, each moment of suffering was no longer something that could break her. Instead, it became fuel, a fire that refused to die, no matter how they tried to extinguish it. The days had passed in a haze of exhaustion, the barn feeling more like a prison with every passing hour. But Evelyn was learning, adapting. The older master's brute force no longer shook her to her core. His violence, while terrifying, became predictable. The younger master's manipulations grew tired, his tricks less effective as Evelyn's mind sharpened in the face of his deceit. She wasn't the same girl who had first arrived, trembling and unsure. She had learned how to hold herself together, how to resist. And today, that resistance would come to a head. It started with a simple command, a task they had given her countless times before. The older master pointed to a stack of heavy crates in the corner of the barn. "Move them," he ordered, his voice like gravel, raw and sharp. "Now." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, the silent expectation that she would fall into line. The others in the barn, those who had been there longer than her, worked diligently, not daring to meet his gaze. But Evelyn, she had been pushed too far. Her body was exhausted, her muscles trembling with the constant strain, but her spirit had not faltered. Not yet. The older master's eyes narrowed, his patience running thin. "I said move them, girl." Evelyn lifted her head. For a brief moment, she locked eyes with him, unflinching, unyielding. Her body may have been bruised and battered, but her gaze was strong. She stood up straighter, her back no longer bent by the weight of their control. She could feel her heart pounding, the adrenaline surging through her veins. This was it. The moment she had feared, the moment she had hoped would never come. "I won't," she said, her voice low but steady. The room fell silent. The other slaves froze, not daring to even breathe. The older master's face twisted in rage, his grip tightening on the whip in his hand. The younger master, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward, a smile playing at the edges of his lips. "You won't?" the older master growled, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "You won't? You think you can defy me?" Evelyn's chest tightened, but she didn't move. Her heart was a thunderstorm in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had already decided. She would not be their tool, their plaything. She would not give them the satisfaction of breaking her completely. The older master was upon her now, his hand grasping her arm with a force that made her knees buckle. But she refused to fall. Her eyes met his, unflinching. She would not beg. She would not give him the power he sought. The older master's fury broke through his control. He swung his arm in a brutal arc, the sting of the whip biting into her skin with vicious force. The crack echoed through the barn, and Evelyn's body jerked from the impact, but she didn't scream. Her teeth clenched, and the only sound that escaped her was the sharp exhale of pain through her nose. The younger master's laughter echoed in the background, but it only fueled Evelyn's resolve. "Still defiant, I see," the younger master sneered, stepping closer. "I do enjoy a challenge." But Evelyn's defiance was more than a challenge to them, it was a threat. And threats were not tolerated here. The older master nodded to the younger one, a silent command passing between them. The younger man's smile widened. He had been waiting for this moment. He was no longer content with games or manipulation. Now, he wanted to push her to the brink, to see just how far her courage could stretch before it snapped. Without warning, the younger master grabbed Evelyn's arm and twisted it behind her back, forcing her to her knees. The older master stood over her, his face a mask of fury and satisfaction. "You'll learn to submit," he hissed, his breath rancid and hot against her ear. The younger master's voice, smooth and mocking, came from behind her. "We'll make sure you understand just how foolish defiance is." Evelyn could feel the sweat trickling down her face, could taste the metallic tang of fear, but she refused to give them what they wanted. She would not cry. She would not beg. Her pride, her very soul, remained intact, even as they forced her to the ground. Then, the true punishment began. The older master, enraged beyond measure, raised his hand and struck her again, and this time, there was no mercy. The blows rained down in rapid succession, each one harder than the last, each one designed to break her. But Evelyn refused to break. Her body might have been battered, but her mind was still sharp, still alive with defiance. But it was the younger master's cruelty that pushed Evelyn further than she ever thought possible. He forced her to witness the others, those who had been broken before her, reduced to nothing more than husks of their former selves. He made her look into the faces of the others who had suffered under their hands, the slaves who had given up, who had been destroyed. And in that moment, Evelyn realized what was at stake. They didn't just want to break her body. They wanted to destroy everything that made her her. They wanted to strip her of her identity, her sense of self. That was when it happened. The younger master stepped closer, pulling Evelyn's head back by her hair, forcing her to look into his eyes. "You still think you're better than them?" he whispered. "You still think you can fight us?" The older master's voice rumbled from behind. "We will make you see your weakness." And that was when the worst happened. The younger master, with a sickeningly slow motion, brought forward something small and sharp, a jagged piece of metal that gleamed in the dim light. It was a tool of their cruelty, used not just for pain, but for humiliation. He pressed it to her throat, just lightly at first, enough to make her pulse race, enough to make her fear the very touch of it. The masters look on, satisfied with the fear they've instilled, but they don't see it. They don't see what is rising within her. The strength that grows when there's nothing left to lose. And as the punishment unfolds, Evelyn's eyes flicker with something more, something that says this is not the end. The pain has shattered her body, but not her will. The mistress sat in her grand home, the silence of the room pressing in on her. Word had reached her about Evelyn's ordeal, the punishment she had endured at the hands of the two masters. The details were vague, the whispers of the other slaves scattered like ashes in the wind, but the essence of it was clear. Evelyn had been broken. She had faced their cruelty and survived, though no one could say how much of her had been left intact. The mistress listened quietly, her face unreadable, as the report was delivered. A part of her, the cold, calculating part, was satisfied. The girl had been dealt with. She had been humbled. But there was something else. A flicker of doubt, something she hadn't expected to feel. Guilt? Perhaps. Or was it something else? A begrudging respect for the girl's defiance, for the fire that had burned even when it seemed there was nothing left to burn? The mistress didn't know. She didn't want to know. Evelyn returned to the plantation a week later. Her body was broken, bruised, and raw, her eyes haunted by the memories of what had transpired. The wounds from the lashes still bled in places, and her skin hung loosely from the weight of starvation and suffering. But there was something different about her. She walked with a quiet defiance, her posture no longer hunched but steady, despite the exhaustion in her limbs. She had been broken, yes, but the world she had seen, what she had learned, had altered her. It wasn't just her body that had been scarred. Her mind, too, had been reshaped by the darkness she had witnessed. She no longer looked at the world through the same lens. No longer did she see the mistress as an untouchable figure of power. No longer did she see herself as a mere victim of circumstance. Evelyn had seen the ugliest parts of human nature, and had been forced to face the worst that men could do. But in that, she had found something that hadn't existed before. Strength. Not the kind of strength that came from domination, but the kind that grew in the face of absolute helplessness, the kind that emerged when everything else had been stripped away. She was not the same girl who had first stepped onto this plantation, naive and frightened. She was something more now. A survivor. But though Evelyn had survived, the scars were undeniable. There was a hollowness to her, a vacancy in her eyes that spoke of horrors too deep to name. The psychological wounds would take longer to heal than the physical ones, but for now, she had learned the art of survival. She had been tested beyond anything she thought she could endure, and yet, she had endured. She had emerged from the fire, tempered by the flames, and what she carried now was more than just the memory of pain. She carried the understanding of the darkest truths about the world and about herself. And though the mistress could see the change in her, she did not speak of it. Evelyn's act of rebellion, small though it was, had begun to take root. She would not submit, not fully. There was a shift in the way she carried herself, the way she interacted with the others. The slaves, those who had seen her once as another broken soul, began to look at her differently. And in turn, Evelyn began to look at them differently, too. They were all bound by the same chains, but now, she understood something that none of them had fully grasped. The power the mistress wielded over them was not as absolute as they had been led to believe. It was a fragile thing, held together by fear and silence. And Evelyn had learned that silence was not the only weapon in this war. Her refusal to submit, her quiet defiance, became her form of rebellion, her claim to something that the masters could never truly take from her. In the days that followed, Evelyn did not speak out. She did not start a revolt. But in every small act. The way she walked, the way she held her head high, the way she interacted with the other slaves, she made it clear that she had not been broken. And perhaps, in the process, she had begun to rebuild herself. She didn't know what the future would hold, or whether she could ever truly escape the horrors of the plantation. But she knew this. She would never again be the same person who had stepped onto this land in the first place. And as the days turned to weeks, the mistress watched from her home, seeing the shift in Evelyn that no one else seemed to notice. The girl who had once been a symbol of control and fear was now something else, a reminder that power, even in its most brutal form, could never fully destroy the human spirit. The mistress, for the first time in a long while, questioned herself. Was it worth it? The power, the control, the cruelty? Could she have broken Evelyn entirely, or had she merely set the stage for something far more dangerous? Evelyn's story would not be the one they expected. Whether it would inspire others to stand up, whether it would become a legend or fade into the shadows, no one could say. But one thing was certain, Evelyn's journey had only just begun. And the questions, about survival, about defiance, about what it meant to truly break or be broken, lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. Would others find the strength to rise with her, or would they remain buried beneath the weight of their own fear? Would the mistress's hold on them tighten further, or would it slip away, piece by piece, like sand through her fingers? Only time would tell. As the days stretched on, the air at the plantation seemed to thicken, as though it had absorbed the weight of Evelyn's defiance. The barn, the fields, the house. Everything had begun to feel like a suffocating reminder of the power the mistress still held over them all. Yet in the silence of the night, when the wind would whistle through the cracks of the buildings and the occasional murmur of the slaves would echo across the yard, there was something else, something unspoken. A tension. A waiting. Something was shifting, but no one could say what. Evelyn stood at the edge of the field late one evening, the sky fading into shades of purple and orange, the last remnants of sunlight creeping along the horizon. She didn't move, her figure silhouetted against the vast emptiness of the land. The wind brushed her face, carrying with it the scent of earth and the faintest trace of freedom. She knew the path ahead was uncertain. The journey she had started was only just beginning, and she was no longer sure where it would lead. She looked out over the fields, her gaze steady, her thoughts quiet. For the first time, there was no fear in her heart, no anxiety about what might come. She had lived through the worst, seen the darkness up close, and while the scars would always be with her, they had become a part of who she was now. She was no longer the same girl who had been dragged here, terrified and broken. She had found something in herself that no one could take away. Not the mistress, not the masters, not the land that sought to break her. Something deep inside her had shifted, and though she couldn't yet name it, it was there. The quiet certainty that her life, her survival, was something she could shape on her own terms. If you believe Evelyn's story is one worth remembering, and you want to see where her journey leads, subscribe now. Like, comment, and share, because sometimes, stories like hers need to be heard. Don't let the silence drown out the courage.